All right. Well, hey, once again, my name is Stan Ward. My wife and I have been in Tyler really since the 90s. We really enjoy the community. And today I'll get to share with you a little bit of kind of my story and burnout, as well as why that's important for you. So to do that, let's get started with really four words. Why give a darn? So I've spent the majority of my life in education in some way or another, either being educated or being an educator, right? And so I am convinced that over every teacher's lectern, and possibly even over every pastor's podium, should be four letters, WGAD. Why give a darn? Okay? And so that's what we're going to start with today. So when I was working on the book, I was working on it in 2019, and at that time, the World Health Organization recognized burnout officially in its international classification of diseases. That was something new. That was a big development at the time. We know about burnout because there's research that goes on all the way back to the 1980s on it. But as we're moving into the late 20-teens, it was getting more and more attention. And at that time, Gallup, who of course does these wonderful surveys on employee engagement, that's where the work on like the Gallup Strengths Finder, the Clifton Strengths Finder comes from, is about engagement at work. At that time, they found that 76% of full-time employees felt burned out at least sometimes. That was 2019. And then something happened in 2020. Yeah, this is a well-educated crowd. I'm not going to have to connect too many dots, right? So during 2020, the Harvard Business Review does a big survey of their readers, and 89% of those responding said their work-life situation was getting worse. All right, so, and I admit, I'm not a big math guy, I'm more of a words guy, but it seems to me that if the baseline is that 76% of full-time employees say they're struggling with burnout at least some of the times, and then a year later, 89% of people are saying their situation's worse, that's a pretty steep curve, right? What's interesting to me is I through the power of Google, right, my superpower of search, I get a weekly email update of whatever the top articles are on the internet about burnout. And man, it's not looking any better in 2021. One of the things actually that's been a recent development that's been really fascinating for me, my wife's a nurse, and that is that a lot of nursing schools now are struggling to get enough students into their program to get them out to meet the demands of the healthcare field because of what? Because of burnout. So you want to talk about your shipping chain, right? The pipeline is struggling now all the way back into these school programs because of the need that we're seeing of folks on the front lines with healthcare. And it's not just healthcare. This is across pretty much any industry, you're going to see evidence of burnout. So that's just some statistics, some numbers, makes me sound official, makes me sound smart. I'm not really this nerdy. I just portray this to look smart. Let me talk about why this matters to me. So this handsome fella is the newly minted Dr. Stan Ward. This picture was taken in 2013 because 1 week after defending my dissertation and earning those letters after the 7-year process, I ended up in, at the time it was Trinity Mother Frances Hospital with the good doctors there. Why? Because I had this blockage in my gut. 40-year-old male, active, reasonably healthy, and they didn't know what the deal was. They couldn't figure out what was going on. In fact, if you've ever heard, let me tell you how this kind of plays out. If you've ever heard that phrase, up your nose with a rubber hose, that's what they do when you have an intestinal blockage, basically. I don't recommend it. It's not particularly fun, right? Nasal gastric tube up the nose, into the gut, pump stuff out. Ugh. And so this is after they finally removed that tube, and I'm like, oh yeah, life is much better. Because I was in there for days getting stuff sucked out of me. And that was actually the beginning of really this 2-year journey where I continued to struggle with bacterial overgrowth in my gut. There were entire months where I struggled to eat solid food. I was in chronic pain. We went up to Southwestern Medical Center there in Dallas. They spent a week doing tests, looking at me this way and that way. And at the end of that process, the doctor came in and said, right? And even when they say, you still get a bill, right? So had that experience. Later, I ended up back in the hospital again with this same issue. And so as we're checking it out here locally, I had a conversation with a doctor and we were talking about, okay, well, what, diet, exercise, what are our options? And his response that really caught my attention was, Mr. Ward, let's talk about quality of life for you. Okay, so my previous, watching TV, when people talk about quality of life, usually it's because things are pretty bleak, right? So that really caught my attention. Caught the attention of my wife. It also caught the attention of our best friends who live in Minneapolis and have a connection there with the Mayo Clinic. And so they informed us that they had done some research and that the Mayo Clinic was actually doing research. This is 2015. Mayo Clinic was doing research on these symptoms, and I could possibly be a candidate for some of the research they were doing for their studies. So we flew up to Mayo, and after literally 2 weeks of poking and prodding by the best medical minds certainly in our nation, if not on the planet, my doctor sat me down and he said, Mr. Ward, of course internally I'm like, Dr. Ward, but MD, for whatever reason, MDs, they don't count it. Mr. Ward, tell me how you manage stress. I was like, no, that is not what this is. That is not what this is. Well, son of a gun, it was. Somehow I had internalized a lot of stress, and I'll just give you the side story here, some of the context. So during that season that I was doing all that PhD stuff, in particular, besides I was working full time, we had young kids. In 2009, my wife's in a car accident. She had a head injury. As a result, she lost her job. She had to go to speech therapy, physical therapy, couldn't get out of bed for months on end. So that was kind of a 1-year process. Actually, shortly after that happened, I got run off the road, so we totaled 2 cars. Then a couple weeks after that, I got sick, threw up on my computer, is where I had all my PhD stuff, lost all that, right? Add to that, then we find out that we had kids. My oldest daughter developed this life-threatening anaphylactic allergic reaction. Add to that, my mom's here. I'm an only child, and again, basically, she was needing a lot of attention. It was acting really kind of weird. We kind of figure out after the fact, oh, this is an opioid addiction that had started after breaking her hip. Like all that swirl is going on. And what I did is I'm like, no, I will push through it. And somehow in the process, I had managed to basically seize up kind of everything going down. Check yourself before you wreck yourself, right? So what I want for you today is to not have that experience, very simply. So here's what we're going to do to help you get there. 1, I want to help you distinguish between burnout and worn out, okay? That's the first thing we're going to do. Then I want to share a tool with you that's going to help you raise awareness on burnout, on where you're at. If you have a pen, you'll need it. If you don't have paper, it's cool. I brought note cards. 3, I want to help you clarify both a mindset and a skill set to help you shift out of burnout if that's where you're at. And finally, we'll make sure we can identify some next steps you can take. So when you leave here, my goal for you today is to have a plan. How's that sound? Is that a good use of your lunchtime? I certainly think so. But I'm kind of, the guy speaking. So, Burnout versus worn out, what is the difference? Best illustration I can give you. So, again, I raised two beautiful daughters. They're both at college now, so my wife and I are empty nesters. My expression is to say I feel like we won this round of the parenting game, right? It's like, wow, this is amazing. But in the process of the girls learning to drive, we had conversations about certain lights on the dashboard of the car, right? Because there's a real difference about what happens when you run out of gas versus when you run out of oil, right? I mean, let's think about that. When you run out of gas, what happens? You just kind of, you're driving along. Yeah, and I've done this before, right? And oh man, right? And you're done, and you stop. However, when you run out of oil, what happens? You keep running, right? There's this residual stuff left over in that engine. Pistons keep doing their thing, but the problem is the whole time those guys are running, what are they doing? They're wrecking the joint. Okay, that's the difference between burnout and worn out. When you're worn out, the process is really pretty straightforward. Rest, refuel, recover. Burnout is something else though. Burnout is what happens when you're out of the resources you need to keep going, yet you keep pushing. Right? We're out of the oil we need to keep this thing running smoothly, yet the engine keeps running. And guess what happens? In the process, yes, things start to break down. And just like in the same way that an engine can seize up and essentially destroy itself, in its later stages, friends, burnout leads to self-medicating behaviors, self-harming behaviors, and yes, even in some of its worst expressions, it's been tied to suicide. That's why we got to pay attention to this. So, remember earlier I mentioned that we've got research going all the way back to the 1980s on burnout. Burnout essentially has three dimensions to it, and this is what's going to help us understand the difference between running out of gas versus running out of oil. Okay? You ready? Dimension number one. This emotional exhaustion is the fancy research term. Think of it as overload. Okay? Again, the demands on the system are greater than the resources the system has available. What does that look like? For some folks, it might be when you wake up in the morning and you think, man, I do not have the energy to deal with this today. And if it happens one day, I mean, we all have those days, but it's when it starts happening over and over and over again that we've got to tune in and see what's going on. And one of the reasons it's so important that we pay attention to this emotional exhaustion or this sense of overload is this actually kind of predicts whether or not these other two are going to be present. So, besides emotional exhaustion, we've got depersonalization. That is the second dimension of burnout. Depersonalization, again, a fancy term. Think about having that robot-like experience where you're just going through the motions. I describe depersonalization really as about a disconnect. When you're disconnecting from people, when you're disconnecting from your sense of purpose. And commonly, most commonly, it expresses itself as a cynicism. Okay? Now, one of the consequences of essentially what I did to myself because I didn't have the skills or the understanding or the self-awareness to really manage my stress well, one of the consequences of that is I just literally do not have the energy that I used to. Okay? And so one of the ways this expresses itself is when I get tired, and I'm already kind of a little introverted, right? There's a lot of interesting stuff going on in here. That's why I'm bald, I think, 'cause it's like the heat. Totally, yeah. This man knows what he's talking about, right? Pastors don't lie. Yeah. Yeah. And so what happens is, like, I start kind of withdrawing. I start getting angry when my calendar is really full, and I start getting angry about it. That's this right here. Okay? I don't know if you've ever had that experience, but that's what it shows up for me. And then a third consequence that comes from this, and these two have a pretty strong relation to burnout as they show up. This one, not as much, but it's inevitable. If you're exhausted and you're disconnected and you're kind of cynical about it and you're hating life, well, guess what? You're probably not feeling real effective, are you? And remember, that classic recipe for burnout it's what happens when the resources you have don't match the demands of what's going on. And so it's really hard to be effective. Good friend of mine in law enforcement here in East Texas, he's working really hard to fight human trafficking. And a couple years ago, he and I were processing it, and I asked him, I said, hey man, how's that going? He said, Stan, I feel like I'm throwing pebbles at a freight train some days. Man, that's classic feeling ineffectiveness, right? And so to the extent that these three are present, you're moving into burnout. Because here's the other thing, burnout's not a switch. It's not like I can turn burnout, off or on. It's a spectrum of experience. And so that means all of us are experiencing some measure of this stuff. It's just a question of, are we in a healthy place or not? So that's both good news and bad news. So if you look at this list and you're like, yeah, I'm like, okay, good news is, you may be in a healthy place with that, because all of us are struggling with that to some measure. The bad news is if there's a lot of that, you got to take action. So far, so good? I'm curious, of these three dimensions, when you think about kind of your professional life, because we're really talking about burnout primarily in that professional space, what have you seen that looks like overload or emotional exhaustion, just in the world around you?
You can't sleep.
Oh, so wound up you can't stop. Great point. One of the things that separates like burnout and depression, because there are some similarities, is that with depression, like you just can't go. With burnout, you can't stop. You just feel like you can't stop. Even though you're just totally exhausted, don't want to get out of bed, you don't feel like you have the energy to deal with it, you can't.
Withdraw.
Yeah, people withdrawing. Yeah. Maybe because they no longer buy into the mission, they no longer buy into the people. What else have you seen in the workspace that reminds you of these concepts?
Procrastination.
Oh yeah. Yeah, that's a really good one. Can you, how do you tie that into this though? Because that's a fun one, yeah. Yeah, it kind of, in a way, it really kind of hits all three, doesn't it? When you're procrastinating, you're not getting things done. When you're not getting things done, you get this feedback loop going, oh, I'm not effective, I'm not able to do X, Y, and Z. But it could also be because of a lack of a connection, that sense of purposeless work. Again, the great thing about having these once a week burnout things, I mean, it's a real drag. I need to stop that mail alert. I got a thing this weekend that basically says, you feel like your work is purposeless? It probably is. Yeah. Kick me again, right? Yeah. And of course, it could also be that procrastination is a sense of, I just don't have the energy to deal with this right now. I've certainly had that thought several times, right? Anybody else got an observation about what this looks like in your work world?
Lack of enthusiasm.
Yeah. And we'll come back to this example later. So I had the opportunity to talk to a university president about this one time, and he was expressing how he went on this like 2-week beach vacation, came back and had no more energy or enthusiasm than when he left. It's like, that's telling you something. That's telling you something.
Anger toward your coworkers for not being as miserable as you are,
Yeah. Yeah. So I get this from C.S. Lewis, and this is to paraphrase him from the Screwtape Letters, but there is this idea that misery likes to hold joy hostage. And so we have a saying in our house, we don't let misery hold joy hostage. But yeah, you're spot on.
And really, anger oversensitivity to everything. Like, slightest criticism or even anything. I would call it butthurt in my house, but
Yeah. So yeah, that's not from C.S. Lewis, but yeah. Yeah. And Coleman, I'm glad you brought that example up too, because part of what this is, and we're not going to be able to get into a whole lot of this today just because of the time we have, but essentially what's happening to all of us is that our fight or flight system has been hijacked. Okay? And so remember, this overload is about you don't have the resources to meet the demands, that emotional exhaustion, not having the fuel to get through. Look, our bodies, and this is, again, stuff that I had to go to Mayo to learn, stuff that Brandon's even helped me with, just working with him is my Tai Chi instructor. I am really thankful to this guy. Like, I'm about to get a little emotional, I'm so thankful. Because it was transformational for me. Why? Because our bodies are made to go through cycles of exertion and rest. And if our organization is, if the assumption is always more, always more, always more, do more with less, do more with less, do more with less. Guess what? There's only exertion, there's no system in place for rest. We'll come back to that in a minute too. And so because of that, our sympathetic nervous system, which is our fight or flight or freeze response, is engaged. There's all these feel bad chemicals that our brain is dumping into our body. We become this like toxic wasteland. And yeah, hurt people hurt people. Right? I mean, my dogs, love my dogs. And well, my dog, we unfortunately had a transition about a week ago with one of them. Well, yeah, sorry, but yeah, burnout, what do you expect, right? But, you know, years of history with these animals, we've fed them, we've given them great love, but when one of them's injured and we touch them, what are they going to do probably? Yeah. So that's what's going on as you're interacting with folks. Just remind yourself that, right? They're hijacked, their nervous system is hijacked, and they need help to get out of that. That's why things like Tai Chi are so helpful. All right. So, yeah, that was kind of a bummer. How many of you guys would like to turn the corner and find some things we can do to get out of this? Yeah. All right. And I'm just curious, anybody identifying with any of this so far? Not in your life, but that you've observed in somebody else. Yeah, you've probably observed this with other people in other places. Yeah. All right, so does everyone have either a piece of paper or a note card, as well as a pen? Writing utensils, we good? Awesome. So what we're going to do is we're going to give you a tool that you can use for a burnout checkup. Here's how we're going to do that. So what I want you to do is on your piece of paper or your note card, you're going to draw 3 horizontal lines on a scale of 1 to 10. If you prefer vertical, you may do that too. The point is just to have these 3 lines. They're like number lines. So a 10 is at one end, a 0 is at the other. Why are we doing that? Well, remember, burnout is a spectrum of experience based on 3 dimensions that are measurable. Okay? And by the way, I do talk about how, this idea of there are a core set of leadership skills that will serve you both at work and home. This is kind of fun because the first time I tested out this little tool was with my oldest daughter. She's her senior year of high school. She's like, Dad, I'm so burned out. I'm like, oh, let me buy you a Pizookie and we'll talk. I'll give you the rest of the story here in a minute. Yeah, so you're going to create 3 10-point scales, and essentially the 0, you're going to label the 0 end with overload, remember emotional exhaustion, this is much shorter. Cynicism, depersonalization, right, disconnect, robot-like experience, not caring anymore. And the third one will be ineffectiveness. On the hamster wheel, spinning all the time, going nowhere. That's the 0. That's like the empty state, right? Now here's where we're going to give you a tool that is completely personal to you. When you think about overload or emotional exhaustion, what is the exact opposite for you? Just think about that for a minute, like the total opposite. See, for me, I'm not really a hyper Timmy kind of guy. Sometimes I can play one on TV if I have to. But the exact opposite of emotional exhaustion for me is just contentment. Just this expression of just fullness in life. Okay? There's kind of a peace that comes with it for me that is actually the opposite of emotional exhaustion, not, 3 lattes in after Starbucks and so what is it for you? Just give it a word or two. That's your 10. Okay, next, cynicism. Again, for me, one of the things I watch for is that cynicism often expresses itself as kind of an anger when my calendar's full. The opposite of that for me is the ability to be like fully present with people. Or fully present in the work I'm doing, maybe with people or my projects, essentially. That's the opposite of that kind of cynicism for me. That's maybe different from for use. Okay. Last one would be the ineffectiveness, right? And so for me, there's just this sense of being successful. When I feel like I'm successful with something, that's the opposite of ineffectiveness for me. It may express itself differently for you. Okay, so once you have your 0 to 10, you've calibrated it based on your experience in life. Now I'm going to ask that you put an X somewhere on that spectrum. Are you at a 3? Are you down on the negative end? Are you feeling in a good positive space, more toward the top end, 7, 8, 9, 5 right in the middle? Just put an X somewhere. And while you're doing that, I'm going to look at my phone because I actually took my dog to the vet today and it keeps blowing up. So I'm going to see what's going on. No, it's going to be good.
But you're holding what contributes to overloading in society.
Yep. Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. We live in an attention economy, right? And what that means is, in order to get your attention, I have to make you feel like you are in a threat of some kind. Yeah. One of the best things that I've done and I've recommended to others is like just quit watching news. Like. Disconnect from the talk radio, disconnect from a lot of the news stuff, and be suspicious even of the headlines that are coming your way. Not that I'm not trying to say all news is fake or anything like that, but I'm just saying everything is worded in such a way that to put you in fight or flight. And that's one of the things we're seeing. That some of the kerfuffle around Facebook right now is this realization of that, right? So you're exactly right. This is part of the problem. This is why I don't wear an Apple Watch, because I know I would just be like jumping. Okay, where are you now? So here's what I want you to do. Take a moment, and I want you to use your imagination and think about, okay, if nothing changes, what is that going to look like in 6 months? Just do a thought experiment. If nothing changes, what is that going to look like in 6 months? And remember, this is a little tricky because you know, what we know about how things work, like with maintaining a fence, right? If you don't put energy into it, it doesn't get better. Your fence gets worse, right? Physical health, right? Exercise, right? If I'm not putting some energy into the system, it doesn't stay stable, it actually goes into decline. So with that, hopefully you're fired up, you're ready to take action. Let's get to some action items. Okay. One of the first things that you can do that you'll find to be remarkably helpful, and it was one of the things I had to do, and it was actually really difficult for me, and it's something I still have to struggle with, is to change my mindset. And there's two things here that are critical, okay? Two things that are critical. The first is this. I struggle with the term self-care. I just do. Like I don't know if it's, my family, they were all hardworking farming folk and just grew up crazy poor. I mean, they did. Thankfully, I didn't have that experience. And so there was just you just get it done and just whatever it takes, right? Well, as I think back to that season where I ended up in the hospital, I was just doing and getting it done and doing whatever it takes, and it took a toll. And so in the same way that when that light comes on the dash of my car about like check the engine light, right, or oil or something, I don't go, you selfish, right, kick the dash. No, I am grateful that the light comes on. I'm grateful for this information. Why? Because this vehicle doesn't just haul me, it hauls my wife, it hauls my family, it hauls my things. I would encourage you, if you struggle with this term self-care, remind yourself, this isn't just about me. This is not about me just taking a spa day for me. This is about me maintaining myself, learning how to maintain myself, developing the skills. Why? Because so much depends on you, which is also part of the problem with the burnout, because so much depends on us. And we feel that. Right or wrong, we feel that. You know, the problem with being a hero at work is you're a hero at work. If everything depends on you, you're in trouble. Your organization's in trouble. Your family's in trouble. It's not sustainable. So this self-maintenance is not about you, it's about your family, and it's about your community or your work group. That's why you do this stuff. The other thing is this. So I know we've talked about burnout in healthcare. So healthcare providers do not like these conversations around stress and resilience and all this stuff because it comes off as if, oh, this is just a self-care issue. And if you just had better self-care, then this wouldn't be a problem. So understand this is not just a self-care issue. This comes from the area of work-life survey. The folks that came up with the original information on the 3 dimensions of burnout also later came up with this tool. Essentially, there's 6 areas that we can look to in the work world that are going to lead to burnout. And so one of the things I do when I work with clients, this is one of the places we start. We figure out which of these 6 is the real problem, because then we can start to drill into that and make some changes, make a difference. So it's not just on you, it could be the environment that you're in is putting an unsustainable workload on you, or, hey, come on, yeah, great, the more the merrier.
Want to get us?
Look, there's 2 seats right there.
Sorry about that.
Hey man, you're good. No, I'm glad. That's free lunch. Don't miss out on that. Just gonna move my stuff. lack of fairness. We talked about the disconnect, right? If you're, I was thinking about someone I worked with who, highly creative individual, was doing a lot of marketing work for a business that was all about business, but she wasn't all about business. Like, money really was not a thing for her. Like, she really wasn't into it. And so there was a mismatch between what she really cared about and the place she was working for, and eventually that, led to some burnout. All right, this is the big thing I want to get to today with the time we have, and that's this idea of small experiments. So, this is the skill set. So the mindset shift is 1, self-care is not selfish. 2, self-care alone is not the key for addressing burnout. And the actions you can take are small experiments, and they create big change. When I work with highly driven leaders, people who really like to swing for the fence, they don't like this. They're like, why small? I'm not into small. That sounds weak. I'm like, oh no, you can't handle the other. Because if you're emotionally exhausted, you don't have the resources to really do the other in a way that's sustainable, right? I don't know if any of you grew up in the 70s or 80s. This guy was on the grocery aisle. And so my T-ball career or my baseball career maxed out at T-ball. But, for that brief season, I was all about the big league chew, right? And so I have this guy in my head. I call him Big League Jimmy because he always swings for the fences. And again, I'll quick Tai Chi story. So I go to do Tai Chi, and I like to say it's like some of my favorite 70 and 80-year-olds on the planet with me. I mean, it's awesome. I love it. And so I'm there the first couple times, and people are doing these slow, gentle, balanced. I'm like, oh no, I'm doing this. I'm going to do that. I'm going to really get my Tai Chi on. Idiot, right? 2 weeks later, I'm calling up to the gym. I'm like, man, my joints are hurting. Do you think I need to take some time off? They're like, we've never heard this before, right? Nobody does this. Big League Jimmy got me in trouble. It's like I'm a pole vaulter. Here's the bar. I'm hanging onto the pole. I'm about to get over it. I'm like, you know what? If I can get over that, it must not be hard enough. I think I'll raise it while I'm in midair. What's that going to do for you? So to get out of that mindset, we use small experiments to minimize the energy expenditure. And here's the deal. Remember, we were talking about that sense of ineffectiveness. Small experiments focus on learning. What did you learn? Not did the action work or not. Let me get into what that looks like. So, how do you do it? 1, clarify the larger goal. What is it you're trying to achieve? Right? 2, come up with one action item that can help you create some progress toward that goal. 3, take action. 4, focus on what you learned, not whether it succeeded or failed. 5, apply learning and restart the process. You go in cycles. So when I got out of the Mayo Clinic, remember I was having trouble. I wasn't able to eat solid food. It's been a couple years of this stuff. I was really weak. Lost a lot of just overall body strength. And so I created a small experiment where I said, you know what? I'm just going to try to do 10 push-ups a day. Right before I take a shower, because I know, that I take a shower every day, so at least I can tie it to an existing habit, and maybe I can start to get some change that way. Right? I tried it. Did I get remarkably stronger? No. But it helped a little bit. Right? Small experiment. What did I learn? Well, by doing a small action and tying it to an existing habit, I can make it stick. And so the 10 became 12, 12 became 20, the 20 became 30, 30, 40, right? And so over time, I was able to get my strength back after those 2 years. Lots of examples of these in the book. On my website, I talk about this a lot as well, and would love to talk if you're struggling with this, please, let's talk, because I want to help you internalize this concept. It is life-changing. Okay, final applications. I have 3 questions for you to consider before we're done. Question 1. We were doing some brainstorming earlier. I'm going to ask you, take a minute, again, close your eyes, let your brain kind of open up and think, okay, what are 3 ways that you could apply this information about mindset shifts or small experiments in the week ahead? Just for the week ahead, what are 3 things you could do? Not saying you have to do it. You just might be able to do.
Start small.
Certainly. Whatever you do, start there. Exactly. Yep.
Pre-plan and prioritize.
Yeah, okay, I didn't know it was going to be an all participate. This is great. So, yeah, no, this is cool. No, you didn't do anything bad. This is great. I'm glad you guys are engaged. It's like any change management phase. There's before the change, there's taking action on the change, and then there's reinforcing the change, right? That's just the cycle. Yep. But I want you to think in terms of what are actual actions. I just asked that all of y'all think about an actual action that you can take. Client of mine I worked with, he thought he was going to need to do a career change. I was kind of thinking it might be burnout. I said, hey, I'm not really a career coach. I do this other stuff, but let's work together for a few weeks and just see what happens, because I think I know what's going on here. And so one of the deals was, he was really into competitive sports. And so all his off time, he was doing like competitive sports, especially on the weekends when he wasn't working. And so we talked about emotional exhaustion, we talked about rest and recovery. And he's like, you know what, I spend all my off time playing sports. I'm constantly competitive. So he was like, he said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll take a day off and just see what happens. It's like it totally transformed his experience, because his body actually had a recovery day that he'd never let himself have before. It's a small experiment. Okay, question 2. So you came up with 3 options. I'm not even asking you to commit to the 3. I'm just wanting to get your head in the space where you can consider some things. What would be one small action? One small action you would be willing to consider? Another small experiment. I realized in our household that it seemed like after 9 o'clock at night, when we had something contentious come up, it didn't go well. So I tried a small experiment. I said, you know what, let's try an agreement for the next couple weeks that if there's something contentious, after 9 p.m., it has to wait to the next day unless it's something on fire. Small, little shift. I started sleeping better, right? I can go to bed a little earlier. And then third, and this is important because remember we talked about this idea of depersonalization is about disconnect from people and purpose. Who can help you make that happen, right? Maybe you've got a friend, an accountability partner, maybe you've got a coworker, maybe you've got a counselor, a physician, a coach, whatever, but who? A pastor, a friend, again, maybe even an employee that you got a great relationship with, but who could help you with taking that action with a focus not on whether it succeeds or not, but what are you learning? Because here's the deal. The basic difference between a comedy and a tragedy is this. It's not that one is funny and one is sad. Comedies end with some sort of community, the marriage at the end of a Shakespeare play or something. Tragedies end in isolation. So if you really want to get traction on this, please don't do it alone. So with that, my website is coachingforinfluence.com. I got a lot of blog posts, free resources that you can download. I brought some of my books today if you'd like a book. The QR code will take you to a variety of resources. And if you're like, I would like some more clarity on where I am with burnout, as well as help figuring out what the action items are I need to take, I am so happy to have that conversation at no charge, okay? All right, thank you all.